It is rare to get a movie that does something new, and critics agreed that what it's doing is exactly the thing that we need right now. But things are lining up that way for Anora, which is about to open in theaters everywhere. It is easily the frontrunner for the Oscars. Today, why Anora is winning everyone over. I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, why don't we start things off here?
Hello, this is the beautiful Annie. She's going to take care of everything you need tonight. Annie, make me proud.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, ты прекрасная. I'm Иван, and ну ты можешь назвать меня просто Ваня.
Vanya, okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
And ты должна знать русский, правильно?
No, I don't speak Russian, but I know Russian.
That is a scene from the new film Anora. Now look, if you watch this trailer for this movie, it's going to tell you that this movie is a love story from the filmmaker Sean Baker. And that's true. That is true on kind of on the most basic level. But also Anora is so much more than that. I think the easiest way to describe it is it's the story of a New York sex worker who gets kind of swept into this life of luxury by a wealthy Russian suitor. Anora has been around for a few months. People have been talking about this movie since it premiered at Cannes last spring because it took home the Palme d'Or, which is like the big prize at Cannes. And then when it played at the Toronto International Film Festival, which was last month, it was just rave reviews kind of everywhere. And I don't know about you, but like I get really invested in movies when all critics are in agreement that this is a movie that offers something that's really needed. I think there's one review that called this movie a miracle, and I'm all in. I'm all in on that. Anora gets wide release in theaters this week. So Kristy Puchko is here and Peter Knegt is here. Kristy, Peter, welcome to the show, y'all.
Hey.
Hi.
How's it going? I'm so happy that you're here. Kristy, why don't I start with you? I just gave that basic setup of the premise of the movie, but without giving too much away, if you can you just talk a little bit more about like what people can expect from Anora?
Yeah, so it's getting compared a lot to Pretty Woman. I made the comparison myself in my review at Mashable, and it is, but it's Sean Baker's Pretty Woman. And for those unfamiliar with his work, like he did Red Rocket, he did The Florida Project, Tangerine, Prince of Broadway, like he tells stories about people living on the fringe of society that are more realistic, but like what's really interesting about this is that like essentially whenever sex workers are in movies in America, it's either Pretty Woman, where it's this very fantastical Hollywood love story where everything is very chaste, or it's like a mafia movie in which they are, subject to a lot of terrible things. But this movie is more realistic in that it is like Anora gets to be a whole person, or Annie, as she prefers to be called, gets to be a real person. She gets to have complexity. She gets to be funny. And there's a lot going on in this movie that is like, yeah, on the outset, it's like this sex worker meets this guy who's like, let me take you away from all this, be my trophy wife. But in this, he's a young Russian oligarch, and she understands that he doesn't want to go back to Russia. He wants a green card. So she's like aware that there's like a bit of a transactional aspect to this.
Right.
And that's actually kind of why she agrees, because like she's like, no, I get this. Like I understand we're infatuated with each other. Yeah. They're like, they like each other, but it's like she's not naive.
Mm-hmm. I should say the idea that this feels like she feels like a real person, like kind of like a fleshed out person. This movie, one of the consultants on this movie is Andrea Weirhan, who's a friend of the show. She wrote the memoir Modern Horror. We love Andrea, and so like this is I'm just really excited for Andrea's work to sort of be translated. It's not an adaptation, but she was sort of a consultant on this movie, and she helped sort of make Annie, this character, that much more real. Peter, why do you think this movie has been getting so much buzz since it's been nonstop since Cannes, which was in May?
Yeah, so I mean, it premieres at Cannes, wins the Palme d'Or. It's the first American film to do that since like The Tree of Life, which I guess is like 15 years ago, and has rave reviews, and that's obviously going to create a lot of buzz. But I think what it has going for it so much beyond that is, unlike a lot of Palme d'Or winners, including The Tree of Life, it's a crowd pleaser. It's super accessible. I think it's the funniest movie of the year. And now that audiences all over are getting the chance to see it, I think that it's just really sort of exploding in terms of word of mouth. And to double that down with, being the Oscar frontrunner, it has a lot going for it.
You know what's not a crowd pleaser is Tree of Life. That's not. Nobody has ever watched that movie and said, "I'm having a good time watching this movie." Like Terrence Malick makes you work for it in ways that Anora does not do that at all. You know, so I'm just glad to be reminded of the debacle that was Tree of Life. Kristy, I want you to drill down a little bit more on Sean Baker because I think he's kind of important. The texture of storytelling that he tells is kind of important here. I think people maybe mostly know him for the Florida Project. I think that was kind of like the biggest kind of breakthrough. What makes him especially well equipped, you think, to tell the story?
He's really great at taking characters who live on the fringe of society and treating them as if we would treat any other like blue collar worker in an American movie, where like it's because like often there's a lot of moralistic stuff that goes on in American movies that judges sex workers, and like he's not interested in that conversation. So like you get things like, you know, the Florida Project, which was about the child of a sex worker, and you get to see that perspective in the film, which is actually really lovely and sweet, and see, you know, just kind of very much like these are just people like you and me, but in a way that doesn't talk down to you. It doesn't treat their trauma or the label of their job as the defining trait of them. It is a part of who they are, and we go from there. And like you got to see that again in Red Rocket, which I thought Simon Rex was really great in.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah, and in this, it's like they set up the sex work stuff very clearly in the first act. There's a lot of nudity and that things that, but I will say, like, don't go see it with your parents. That might be awkward unless your parents are like very chill with a lot of things. Mine aren't, so that's not. This is not going to be a movie we watch together.
Good
but
note.
like it is. I agree with Peter. It's a total crowd pleaser. It's really funny because what he's able to do is just tell a blue collar comedy about sex work. Like you were talking about the details, and like one of my favorite details in this is when she's not out in the club doing her job, she's back in the green room eating her lunch out of a Tupperware, and it's like most of us have been there. Most of us have been in that space of like, I used to work at the Gap and I absolutely had Tupperware lunch. And could I afford the clothes at the Gap? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like, I get that. So like, maybe I've never worked in a club, but in that moment, I'm like, I see you, Anora. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the intelligence that really moves me about Sean Baker is that his eye for detail is this is the thing that you need in order to do this job effectively, which is like so many movies do not care about that level of detail. So I'm always really grateful as I sort of watch those movies. Peter, through this movie, you know, all the eyes are on Anora. That's played by Mikey Madison. A number of critics have been calling her performance like this major sort of breakthrough performance. The Oscar buzz has already begun. You know, what makes her performance stand out, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to see this movie for a second time this weekend with my mother because we were both such huge fans of Better Things, which Mikey Madison was incredible in. And not enough people saw that film. But I mean, this movie doesn't work if you don't fall in love with Anora, like pretty much immediately. And you do, because Mikey Madison is just so towering and magnetic. And she's in like every single scene of the entire movie. It's an incredibly difficult performance. I believe she didn't speak Russian before this film was made.
Oh, wow.
It's just, you know, it's a definitive Star is Born situation here. And I feel like, yes, she could very well win an Oscar for this. And that's just incredible. And I'm
No, I mean,
I'm just really happy for her.
The idea of this performance sort of putting someone on the map, I think that's also something that like drives me to the movies, Peter. Like I'd love to go see a performance when everybody's saying, we will talk about this actor differently. We will talk about this person differently after this performance. It very much feels like that's the vibe that people are talking about with this movie. Kristy, this is a very New York movie in ways that you don't get a lot of. I'm trying to do a New York accent, but also I should tell people I'm in Vancouver. I usually host a show from Toronto, so currently in my body is very confused about the time lag. The jet lag is what they call that, and so as a result, my New York accent was bad. But this is a very New York movie, and we don't have a lot of New York movies. We haven't seen a lot of like very New York movies in a little while. Do you want to talk about all the ways it's a New York movie?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. It's like, it feels like one of those 80s New York movies where, again, it was just kind of like, here's a random worker that is not living a glamorous life, like think After Hours, you know, Moscow on the Hudson. Hell, I'll even go Fisher King. That's a little out of the realm. But it's like that kind of thing where you have this collision of cultures that is just happens every day here. And so it's like literally Russian oligarchs hassling a Brooklyn sex worker is like the collision. You know, Romeo and Juliet, but the Capulets like have, their own private jets. And the Montagues is one girl who has a bad attitude and isn't taking anything from anybody.
Yeah.
It's really funny because you get to see this moment. And there's such a New York attitude in Anora, because accent aside, which we heard in the clip, she's got the accent. I love it. But there's like a very defining moment in the film where essentially goons come into the house and are like, what do you mean you married this girl? Do you know what she does for a living? And she is very much like, no, I will not be treated this way. And that's kind of where the movie takes this turn where it's like we start to realize as an audience, like, oh, I'm used to seeing specific kind of stories about sex workers. And this movie goes, no, we're not doing that. That's not how she's not going to get slapped around. She's not going to put up with this. She's not going to get her fingers snapped in a red box and go, that's not what this movie is. And that's actually what makes it so exciting, because it's such a New York movie in that it is about that cataclysmic and like fateful collision of cultures where you're like, I don't know what happens now.
I love that idea of this movie sort of taking that pivot, because Peter, I think like with Sean Baker, he's really interested in class. He's someone who's like investigates class a lot in his work. When you see this movie, do you see it as a statement film, or do you see it more of a, hey, drop into this atmosphere and just spend a bit of time in this atmosphere film?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, and I don't want to give too much away, but I think this film is, very much about working class heartache. The ending is again devastating, but I don't want to give too much away. And I feel like ultimately it's not a fairy tale. It's not Pretty Woman 2 in the end. It has a lot to say in just how it humanizes Anora and the characters around her, just like Sean Baker's done with all of his films. So I feel like, maybe it's a film that's making a lot of statements. And I think it's just a film that, this really destigmatizes a sex worker and really sort of beautifully gives us a portrayal of a woman, doing what she needs to do to get by.
There's a transition that happens, Kristy, when a movie sort of escapes the world of critics and enters the larger public conversations. It's always a tenuous time for a movie, to be honest with you, because sometimes a movie that is so well received by critics, like, I don't know, Tree of Life, say, is received by audiences in a way where you go, I did not expect the audience response to be this. Do you see the public embracing a movie that is this layered, that is this unconventional in many ways? Or do you think it'll be kind of a difficult thing to translate to wider audiences?
I do think it'll transcend that, because I understand the fear of like, oh well, critics love it, but because I honestly felt that way going to see it for TIFF, where I was just like, no, I know Cannes loved it, but like, I don't know, but I like Sean Baker, so I was optimistic. But it's actually, I would say, probably his most accessible film. And I think Poor Things did really well last year, and Poor Things is way weirder than this movie, but it's also a movie where like sex work and sexuality and nudity is all just part of the concept. And I think it's interesting that Peter called the ending devastating, because I actually think it's very beautiful. I don't know. I walked out of that movie feeling very alive. And I think that's part of what I think will be interesting about this movie is like how people are going to respond. But also something I think is interesting is that the studio has already shown it to sex workers. And there was like, it's all over online if you look, that a bunch of them wore those like very high stilettos that I would break an ankle on. So respect to anyone that can manage that. But they like in applause clacked their heels like visibly on camera. And I was just like, I love that. I love that energy where it suggests they feel seen by this. But it's like, it's not a movie that's talking down to us. It's not preaching. It's just like Sean Baker doesn't make movies like that. No. His movies are just like, we're going to throw you into the situation and let's go. And like, I think that people will respond to that. I think people will be curious about the critical praise. I think people will be curious when they hear like, what do you mean it's like this, but it's not? And like, I'm optimistic. I think we heard already it's doing really good in New York and LA. And I don't want to I'm not a box office predictor, so I don't want to make that call. But I do think it's one of those movies that people can walk into and be like, wow, and like just. It's a very exciting movie, and I think it can be. I think it has. Yeah, I think of all of his movies, this is probably the one that is the most accessible and the most commercial. And like, when you see it, you'll be like, yeah, for Sean Baker.
Well, I'm rooting for this particularly being like a word of mouth movie, because I love a word of mouth movie, like a movie that people go see and go, forget everything you heard, you got to just go experience this thing. And I just want to ask you, Peter, I got 30 seconds left here, but this movie did open in select cities last week. What sort of reaction are we seeing so far from the public?
I mean, it opened to huge numbers in New York and LA, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like the vibe is very comparable, oddly, to Parasite, which also won the Palme d'Or and then came out in the fall. And
also word of mouth movie.
Absolutely. And people are just thirsty for smart adult cinema, and this is that and then some. And I'm really optimistic too that this is going to become, a crossover hit in a way that we haven't seen from a Sean Baker film before.
Thirsty for smart adult cinema is exactly correct. Kristy and Peter, I got to leave it there. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Of course.
Bye.
Kristy Puchko is a film editor for Mashable in New York City. Peter Knegt is a writer for CBC Arts and the host of Here and Queer on CBC Gem. Anora, by the way, opens in theaters this Thursday. I'm Alamin Abdulmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, look, we're going to switch gears now to another story in film, one that involves the movie star Fan Bingbing. There's, I think, a solid case to be made that not that long ago, Fan Bingbing was the world's biggest movie star. She was by far the most popular actor in China. Her movies dominated that box office. And then she was in a bunch of American blockbusters. But then, at the height of her career, back in 2018, Fan Bingbing kind of just disappeared without a trace. She emerged a few months later after the Chinese government fined her $70 million for failing to pay back her taxes, and then it kind of looked like her film career was over. Well, now she's back. She's starring in a movie called Green Knight. It's a thriller set in South Korea in which she plays a Chinese immigrant trapped in an abusive relationship. Rachel Ho is back on the show to talk about Fan Bingbing's return. Rachel, welcome to the show, friend.
Thank you very much, Alamin.
Good to see you, pal. Listen, for anyone who's not familiar with Fan Bingbing, what do you think made her so famous?
She's honestly kind of like almost a factory-made superstar. Like, I'm not saying she was made in a factory, but she's immensely talented. Like, she is genuinely a great actress. She is beautiful. She is very well-spoken. She's personable. She says the right thing at the right time to the right people every single step of her career, it feels like. Like, I feel like she's just the prototype to what any publicist, any studio would want to have as their kind of like their crown jewel in their system. And it's kind of almost impossible to find a Western counterpart to her. I thought Tom Cruise, maybe, like, he's someone that he gets movies made. He's
good at being a movie star.
Exactly that. Yeah. But it's like, that's not even, to me, very comparable. Like, I don't think it's comparable. But, she had her really big breakthrough in 2003 in a movie called Cell Phone. They made a couple of those. She was massive. She was like the best paid actress, or best paid actor, I should say, like just across the board of all of the entertainers. And she dominated the, endorsements, the Chinese entertainment industry. And given their strength, their stronghold, it's like, you could make an argument to say she was the biggest star in the world, like you said, and as you said, she did appear in some Hollywood films, not too many, but like, she's been in some, and but her home was definitely like Chinese cinema was Fan Bingbing for a really long time.
Okay, so but like movie stars like Tom Cruise, if that's the analogy you're making, and you're saying that doesn't even quite capture it, they don't just disappear. So can you just run us through why she disappeared?
It's like a wild story to me. So she got dinged for tax evasion, and it is something like when you read into it of what she did is not unheard of. Apparently, basically every wealthy Chinese person was doing it. It's kind of like wealthy people in the West going, I'm going to open a bank account in the Cayman Islands. It's that kind of thing. It's just a done thing. But she just got caught. And however that happened, who knows? But she got caught. And because of her superstardom, because she has such a huge profile, they have to make an example of her. They can't just skirt her, give her a slap on the wrist and send her on away. So the way that it's told, there's a Vanity Fair article that came out. Mei Jiang wrote it. It's really, really insightful, very comprehensive. Sources that were close to Fan said plainclothes cops basically showed up to her house one day, escorted her away, brought her to what they call a residential surveillance designated area. Kind of sounds like a high-end prison, like a really fancy spa holiday prison, but you don't get any privacy. She wasn't allowed to speak to her family, her friends. She couldn't make any social media posts. Apparently she couldn't even take a shower alone. Like, she wasn't given paper and pen. She couldn't do anything while she was gone for those few months. And it was jarring for the public. They didn't announce that she was being taken away, of course, but it was this woman who is so prominent in social media by paparazzi, and then all of a sudden she just wasn't there anymore. I think of Kate Middleton when she disappeared for a few months to get cancer treatment. Everyone, lost it. And it was kind of the same thing of where did she go and what happened? And then, she returns and she makes her penance on social media saying, how embarrassed she is, how ashamed she is. Sure. She let down her country. She let down the society support, the trust that they had in her, all of those things. So it's a really crazy story that could be made into a movie. Probably won't be, but it's pretty crazy.
I was going to, as you're describing that, I want to see that movie, starting with the plainclothes cops showing up and taking you to this fancy spa that is also a prison, which is, first of all, a great description. I would like to know everything about that. Someone write this movie. That's all I'm saying. But this is not the movie we're talking about today, because we're going to talk about Green Knight. You've seen her new movie, Green Knight. What do you think? What do you think of this movie?
I liked it. It's kind of a noirish film. It's about a woman, a Chinese immigrant living in Seoul, South Korea. She is there by way of a spousal visa. Her husband is a real piece of trash, abuses her all the time. We are witness to the abuse that she suffers. And it is implied that this is an ongoing thing, not just a one-off situation. She meets a young girl who is also being abused, but in a different type of relationship. And the two of them kind of go on a vengeance, kind of a revenge thrill in a sense. And it's an interesting film. I found it really entertaining. I enjoyed it. I thought that it talked a lot about good nuance about, abuse, the options that immigrants have, the options that women have very specifically in that. And I don't think every single note really particular hits with this movie, but I do think it's a good film. One thing I found really interesting in it was, like I said, she's there by way of a spousal visa. And as a Chinese immigrant in Seoul, she is putting up with all of this horrendous abuse because she doesn't want to get deported back to China. And for somebody like Fan Bingbing to kind of have that messaging in a film, to me, it speaks volumes. Far
is that
more
pointed?
Than ever.
You read that as something really pointed?
I think so. I think it's certainly not a coincidence, and especially she obviously would have read the same thing in the script herself. She doesn't live in mainland China anymore. Apparently, she lives in Hong Kong, and I found it a really bold thing for her to be a part of because. She is, I don't want to say she's in danger, I don't say, but, they will still see it. It is still making it is making a really big statement, in my opinion.
For her to make a movie about someone who does not want to get deported to China. I would say, or you should also say this movie is not being released in China, too. What's your read on what this says about her relationship with the country right now?
It's tricky because it is a film that even if she wasn't in it, it's just a film that wouldn't be released in China, not for that specific line, but there's drugs, there's a queer relationship in it. Their censor is quite conservative and they wouldn't let a film like this in, but she is blacklisted for all intents and purposes. I don't know. I don't really foresee her doing a film in China for quite a while, at least 10, 20 years. I think that they, like I said, they really need to make an example of her that even someone as big as her cannot get away with something like this. So sharpen up and, act accordingly, basically, I think is what they're trying to say. And Joan Chen went through something similar when she was younger in the 80s and 90s. She was blacklisted, but then eventually she was let back in and she was able to do more films there and also have a career in Hollywood as well. So I'm sure Fan Bingbing is probably looking to Joan Chen's career in the sense of what kind of path did she take? Can we do the same thing? But China is a very different country today than it was when Joan Chen went through that.
We got literally 30 seconds. Fast forward a few years if you can. Where do you see her career going from here?
I actually think she could have a very successful career, Hong Kong, Korea. Nowadays, you don't just need to work in your home country. I think we've seen that many times over. She has done some Hollywood films. I think she could find a great career in Europe, UK, America, even Canada. She wants to come over here and do some movies. I think she's immensely talented. It's not to discount anything. Everything that's happened to her, she is still an incredible actress. And I think that she will find her footing, just probably not in China.
I like your subtle pitch of being like, hey, Fan Bingbing, come to Canada if you can.
Come to Canada.
Come to
we
Canada.
got good Chinese food, too. You can hang out here.
Rachel, you're a delight. Thank you so much for being here, friend. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.
Of course. Rachel Ho is a film critic at Exclaim Magazine, and you can see Green Knight because it is on Apple TV. That is it for the show today. My name is Alamin Abdul Mahmoud. Look, if you're listening to this on podcast, if you don't mind giving us a follow, we'd really appreciate it. Get in touch on Instagram. We are at Commotion CBC. My name is Alamin Abdul Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. I'm going to be here tomorrow, so if you're going to be here, you know what? It's a date. I'll see you then.